Today, we're exploring the past and present of the Tower Green.
Located within the fortress of the Tower of London is the Tower Green. From executions to residences to ravens, there's a lot to unpack just within one corner of the Tower of London. Now for a house built for a queen, until she was beheaded.
The half-timbered buildings with the black doors were built around 1530 and make up the Queen's house.
Henry VIII built the Queen's house for his second queen, Anne Boleyn, and then 3 years into their marriage, he had her executed, so we'll get into that later. The Queen's house has served many purposes over the years. At one point, it was a mint, and then it was a storage area for the crown jewels.
Today, the Queen's house is home of the resident governor of the Tower of London. There are actually several people who live at the Tower of London.
There are soldiers, a chaplain, a doctor, and of course, Yeoman Warders who live here.
I can't believe people actually live here. It's just so hard for me to imagine that.
Yeah, there's a person on TikTok who lives here and he shows like a day in the life of what it's like to live at the Tower of London. It's just bizarre. There's all these tour groups and they're just walking by with their groceries and stuff. I mean, what a life.
Right. Yeoman Warders have been guarding the Tower of London since Tudor times.
There were 32 Beefeaters here, and they were all a part of the armed forces. And yes, they are referred to as Beefeaters. They got that nickname because under Henry VIII's reign, they were actually given daily portions of beef, which at the time was a big deal because most commoners could not afford beef.
The Yeoman Warders live here on site with their families. Some of them live near the Queen's house in the buildings with the green doors.
Okay, we're about to see the cutest occupants here at the Tower Green.
Rumor has it that the kingdom and the Tower of London will fall if the 6 ravens ever leave the fortress.
So to be safe, there are 7 ravens here.
That rumor was supposedly started by Charles II, who was very superstitious and insisted that the ravens be protected.
All the ravens can fly, but they stick around because why not? They have free food and free lodging, courtesy of the Raven Master. Since the Tower of London is so haunted, I think just like the ravens are the cherry on top. It really gives this place a spooky vibe.
Now let's get to the darker history of the Tower Green.
Overall, there were 6 people executed at the Tower Green. 3 of them were queens of England. So let's start with the most famous queen. Anne Boleyn was accused by her husband of adultery and found guilty, and then she was executed for treason. And this was all so Henry VIII could marry his side chick, Jane Seymour, which he did 11 days after Anne was executed.
Anne lived at the Queen's house during the last 18 days of her life.
She asked her husband to allow her to be executed by sword instead of an axe, which was the French way, which he allowed. So generous of him. What a nice guy.
He also cut her some slack, no pun intended, by allowing her to be executed on the Tower Green.
It was a privilege to be executed within the privacy of the Tower Green, sparing people from the jeers and insults of large crowds. Most prisoners here were executed in public on Tower Hill, just outside the fortress. So this is really creepy. After Anne was beheaded, her lips were still twitching and her eyes were still blinking, which must have completely freaked people out.
Anne's execution, as well as the 2 other beheadings that we'll cover, occurred at this site.
Queen Victoria had asked people to basically find the exact location where the executions occurred, and then when they came back to her with the results, she had pavement laid down in the area to mark the spot. Now there's a memorial here with a glass pillow as if to offer the victims some comfort that they didn't get at the end of their lives. Anne Boleyn and her cousin Catherine Howard had a lot in common. They were both married to Henry VIII, he ordered both of their executions, and they were both buried here.
Catherine Howard was the 5th wife of Henry VIII. She was found guilty of treason for committing adultery with her cousin, Thomas Culpeper.
Apparently, the night before her execution, Catherine asked that the executions block be brought to her, and she practiced for hours laying her head on the block, which is just, it's so tragic. There was one more queen to be executed, but this time it was because of Henry VIII's daughter.
Lady Jane was queen for only 9 days.
Essentially, Mary, Henry VIII's daughter, dethroned Jane and her husband, Guilford Dudley.
Seeing them as a threat to the crown, Queen Mary had them executed. Before being executed, Jane watched her husband's corpse being carried back from his execution, and then got to see her execution being prepped from her room.
That must have been so horrendous to see the aftermath of your spouse being killed, knowing full well that you're next. Jane was about 16 years old when she died on February 12, 1554. The burial site for all three women is right behind me, so let's go inside. Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula, which means St. Peter in Chains, is the former parish church of the Tower of London.
There were so many people buried here, and over 1,000 bodies were discovered underneath the floor during a renovation.
All three queens were buried beneath the altar here. Above each queen's resting place is a plaque in their honor. It's really hard to fathom that someone who is as large as life as Anne Boleyn was just buried in a common box underneath the floor. It's hard to process. It's really sad and heartbreaking. I mean, no one deserves that kind of treatment. It's definitely a good place to go and pay your respects. Now that we're here, we've seen so many people just walk by the Tower Green, they look at the execution site, they move on. But there is tons of history here, and I'm glad that we broke it down just by looking at this little area of this whole complex.
Yeah, and I never knew ravens were so important here. I think it's so cool they have a raven master who just takes care of the ravens. That's his job.
What did you like the most about this vlog? Comment below and let us know. And as always, thanks for watching.
Does my hair look good? It's not blowing around.
And Jane and her husband.
She was found guilty.